One of the most widespread theories in the Pokémon community is the conception that Ditto is a failed clone of Mew, and when you look into the evidence, it seems like a really compelling hypothesis. They are the only two Pokémon that can learn the move Transform by leveling up. They have the same coloration in both their normal and shiny forms, their ability to change forms is based on their genetic structure, and they have the same weight. This theory suggests that the scientist who experimented with Mew with the intention of cloning the mythical Pokémon in order to create Mewtwo made some mistakes along the way. From the evidence we gathered from multiple sources, we know this was done by a group of scientists led by the founder of the Cinnabar lab, Mr. Fuji. Also, there seems to be some intervention of Team Rocket in there. What's the connection of this with Ditto? Well, you can find Ditto in the mansion where Mewtwo was created, as well as at Cerulean Cave, where Mewtwo hid after fleeing from Cinnabar Island. Then, in Gen 6, Ditto can be found in the Pokémon Village, next to where Mewtwo is hidden. So there's the theory. Ditto is a failed clone of Mew, one of the many attempts of Fuji's team before successfully creating the genetic Pokémon. But I disagree. There are a few important holes in this theory, even if I agree that there seems to be a connection between Mew and Ditto, but that being a failed cloning experiment is not correct. Today we are going to explore how the cloning theory is ignoring a lot of evidence, and we'll also propose a different hypothesis. That hypothesis is going to be really something special and extremely speculative, but I think I have something to bring to the conversation. First, we have to ask ourselves, if Ditto is a failed attempt to replicate Mew, why are there so many of them? All the failed clones ended up looking the same? And yes, Ditto could reproduce through a process similar to mitosis, but this doesn't explain how they reached so many distant regions. And if they are clones, why would they be at Cerulean Cave? They just followed Mewtwo here? Or is it the other way around? Mewtwo could have been drawn into the cave by the presence of familiar faces from the lab. What I'm saying is that we don't really pay enough attention to where we find Ditto and what those places tell us about our blood. Let's see, in Kanto we don't have much consistency. For example, in Gen 1, Ditto only appeared in the Pokémon Mansion if you were playing Pokémon Yellow, but every subsequent Kanto game has had Ditto appearing in this place. The other games of the generation had Ditto appearing in Route 23 and in Rock Tunnel, the last one only in the Japanese blue version. These places would be abandoned by our subject in the next games, but we could say that this is due to the Rock Tunnel being a cave and Route 23 being next to Victory Road, another cave. Ditto seems to like caves. Kanto also has them in Route 13, 14 and 15. The Ditto from these routes most likely ran away from the Pokémon Mansion to the east, which could explain why they can't be found here in Gold, Silver and Crystal, which explains why they are not here in the Gen 2 games and their remakes. By that point, the volcano from Cinnabar Island erupted, destroying the Pokémon Mansion that was their home, and Ditto disappeared from the region in Gen 2, only appearing at Cerulean Cave in the remakes. Going to the Johto region, Ditto appears in routes 34 and 35, both of them near the Pokémon Daycare. Possibly someone left Ditto here, and from that Pokémon the species populated the area. In Heart Gold, Soul Silver they also appear in Route 47, another route near caves. Something similar to the situation of the routes surrounding the daycare could have happened at the Pokémon Village. Wolfric explains that this place is a sanctuary for Pokémon who run away from their trainers. Ditto could have found this place while escaping from humans and then reproduced. We'll talk about Ditto reproduction later, don't worry. In Sinnoh, they appear only through special methods, like using the Poké Radar or visiting the Trophy Garden, so these don't really count. In Galar, they appear near the Lake of Outrage, an area known for its close relationship with evolution, as here is where you can find new evolutionary stones each day, and also something else. Something that this place has in common with the locations where you can find Ditto in Unova, Hoenn, and Alola. Hoenn Route 114, the Unovan Giant Chasm, Mount Hokulani in Alola, the previously mentioned Lake of Outrage, and Kanto's Cerulean Cave. Ditto appears in all of these locations, and all of them are related to meteors and alien Pokemon. Giant Chasm, a meteor is said to have crashed here, carrying the original dragon, and you can find a few other Pokemon linked to aliens here. Mount Hokulani, the place has connections with space exploration, with its observatory and meteor showers, thus the presence of Minior and many other alien Pokemon. Lake of Outrage, besides being a location where the energy of Eternatus is stronger, creating evolutionary stones, this place is in the wild area, which seems to exist as a consequence of the meteor crash from 20,000 years ago. Cerulean Cave, it's next to and is part of the same mountain range as Mount Moon, another place related to meteors and alien Pokemon. And finally, Route 114 in Hoenn. This place is the most important one to understand what Ditto is and what it means for the Pokemon world. This route and the neighboring meteor falls are known for their ancient meteor craters. All of this makes me think that Ditto might be an alien Pokemon that arrived to the Earth on a meteor. But that's not the end of this. We have to see how Ditto is related to Mew. In this route we have the Fossil Maniac, some guy who loves fossils and is working on an excavation behind his house. In the post-game of Pokemon Emerald he finds a giant cavern, and it is here where Ditto appears. But this cave has been closed for a really long time. First, this completely disproves the clone theory, but before expanding on that, let's keep exploring the cave. This tunnel starts in Route 114 and ends under the desert from Route 111. What else can we find in the tunnel? Whismur and Loudred, who seem to have been living trapped in this cave alongside Ditto for all this time, similar to how they seem to have come out of Rastorf Tunnel once the excavation work in that place started. Either that or they are the only Pokemon who would tolerate the constant noise of the Fossil Maniac working in the cave. But the Rastorf project was cancelled because it caused discomfort to the Whismur from the cave. And the Fossil Maniac said he stopped the excavation because he doesn't think there are fossils in the cave. So I think it's most likely that they lived with Ditto in the cave for a really long time. Oh, by the way, our friend the Maniac was wrong. There are fossils in the cave. The tunnel ends under the original position of the Mirage Tower. At the top of this building you can pick up a fossil Pokemon, options being Anorith and Lilip. After making your choice, the tower collapses and the other fossil disappears, only to appear again at the end of the desert underpass. All of this upon the alien connection seems to indicate that Ditto has links with ancient times. Remember, Anorith is the most ancient of the fossil Pokemon, and it was a creature just like Lilip. I guess this tunnel had to be underwater until 2000 years ago. That's the last time Kyogre and Groudon were fighting each other. There's a chance Ditto is an ancient alien creature that arrived to the Earth on a meteor, and here is where we get our connection with Mew. All we mentioned to this point gives an scenario in which I would like to propose the idea that Ditto could be evidence of Pokémon having their origin through panspermia. Panspermia is the hypothesis that life exists in different parts of the universe and is distributed between planets by things like space dust or meteors, something we know for a fact happens in the Pokémon world, Solrock, Lunaton, Clefairy and many others being living proof of this. Theories about panspermia go back hundreds of years, but the most interesting ones were proposed in the 70s by a British duo of astronomers. These guys theorized and later confirmed that dust in interstellar space is made up of organic materials, mainly of carbonic origin, and from these findings they developed their panspermia model, suggesting that life on Earth is at least partially of extraterrestrial origin, the main point in their theory being that living organisms such as bacteria and viruses, as well as isolated DNA and RNA, could travel in meteors to eventually reach new planets where they would develop and cause new diseases, epidemics, and also trigger any evolutionary changes to the organisms of the planet. These ideas are not foreign to Pokémon. Deoxys is literally a representation of this model of panspermia. An alien Pokémon mutated from a virus integrated with representations of DNA. Interestingly, Team Rocket is behind Deoxys in the manga, and they were the ones who created Mewtwo. And guess the Rocket name is related to space stuff, who would have thought? Mew is said to be the first Pokémon to ever exist. We know it is an ancient species. We saw fossils of Mew in the anime, and it learns ancient power by leveling up, a move associated with a species from millions of years ago. And not to mention, its DNA contains the genetic code of all Pokémon species, the common ancestor of all Pokémon. This is also supported by Mew being an embryo, as embryos are considered evidence of common ancestry between species because of the similarities between embryos of different animals. We know the Pokémon universe was created by Arceus. It appeared from the void and gave life to the creation and Lake Trios, who then shaped the world. Well, Mew is possibly the first Pokémon that appeared after the creation of the universe by Arceus, but only after Ditto. Ditto can reproduce with every Pokémon with exception of most legendary Pokémon and Ditto, which is intriguing to say the least. We know, thanks to Manaphy and Phione, that legendary Pokémon are not necessarily unique. They do mate and reproduce. The same happens with Solgaleo and Lunala. This point is even stronger now with the Crown Tundra DLC, in which we can find the 3 legendary birds with new regional forms, which would require adaptation through reproduction. Just like Mew would need to reproduce to create the other species of Pokémon. Now, I'm not saying anything new with this. Many before had proposed the theory of Mew being created by Arceus to kickstart life on Earth. But Mew is already a very complex organism. Ditto, on the other hand, isn't. All the similarities between these Pokémon seem to indicate to me that Ditto might be more, or at least equally as ancient as Mew. These Pokémon reflect how life came to be in our Earth. What I think is that after creating the world, Arceus set a process in motion, a process similar to what we see in theories about the creation of life. 4 billion years ago, the conditions of the Earth were much different to what we have now. Oceans of acid covered the surface, and the atmosphere was filled with toxic gases from volcanic eruptions. In that hostile environment, a chemical reaction took place between elements elements found in the earth and energy from natural events like a thunderstorm. From this reaction, the first organic molecules originated. This is the theory of the primordial soup. This is when protocells appear, the origin of living cells, formed of collections of lipids with a membrane of acids protecting a center of replicating ribonucleic acid, a precursor to proteins and DNA. And through a process of cell replication, these cells mutated and created more complex cells. This is what I think Ditto is, a representation of the concepts of RNA and DNA developing in the primitive times of the Earth. So my wild claim for this is that Arceus set evolution in motion by panspermia. Meteors carrying Ditto arrived to the planet, just like what happened with Deoxys, Lunaton and Solrock. But we need another piece of evidence linking Ditto and MEW in order to make such a claim. How does Ditto reproduce? We know it changes its cellular structure in order to breed with other species, but they can't do this with other Dittos. This means Ditto reproduces without the need of a partner, and with this Pokémon being basically a cell, it has to reproduce through mitosis, when a cell divides into two cells that are genetically the same. Now this means Ditto reproduces asexually. Meanwhile, MEW is a Pokémon that surely reproduces with the need of interaction between two different gametes, like most species, and here is where we find the explanation of why Ditto is found in the Pokémon Mansion. MEW is a Pokémon that was created by recombining MEW's genes. What does this mean? Well, there are two things we have to discuss here, two concepts that in some form are related to each other: generic recombination and recombinant DNA. Generic recombination is something that we see during meiosis, a process really similar to the mitosis we mentioned earlier, but this happens during the exchange of generic material between two different creatures, creating offspring. Now the difference is that this process doesn't create new cells that are identical to the previous one. In this case, the chromosomes of both cells intertwine, creating new different chains of genes, which leads into the offspring having characteristics of both parents. Yes, this is how Pokémon eggs are made. And it's disgusting. This is important because Mewtwo isn't an exact clone of Mew. This means that they had to do something to its DNA, and that's what recombinant DNA is for. Recombinant DNA is DNA that has been created through genetic recombination done in laboratories using multiple kinds of methods, one of them molecular cloning. Recombinant DNA is made combining DNA from different organisms, reason why it is sometimes called chimeric DNA, which is exactly what I think happened with Mewtwo and is the reason why Ditto is in the mansion. Mewtwo was created thanks to manipulation of Mew's DNA, mixing it up with Ditto's to create a new, more ductile genetic structure. After all, chimeric DNA is only possible because DNA from all creatures have basically the same chemical structure, but they are different on their sequence. The closest two creatures are in the evolutionary line, the more similar their DNA is, making Ditto a perfect candidate to mix Mew with. And in real life, organisms developed different gametes because that kind of reproduction, while more complicated, actually facilitates generic variety, which avoids long-term problems related with recessive genes, which I think could explain Ditto's transforming ability not being able to create exact copies of other Pokémon, even failing to replicate faces or human speech. Basically, what they did is what the people from Jurassic Park did, remember? They couldn't obtain enough DNA from the fossils, so they completed the generic sequence with DNA from frogs. And Mr. Fuji, who was part of the project, founded the Cinnabar Island Lab, where they revive Pokémon from their fossils, a literal reference to Jurassic Park. And remember, in the first Pokémon movie, they create Mewtwo out of the DNA obtained from a fossil. So my final hypothesis is, Arceus created the Pokémon universe and gave it life through panspermia. Ditto and Mew being the two Pokémon more closely related to the original organic material, and the rest of the Pokémon species evolved from them. Since then, Ditto has found a home in caves. A long time after that, the scientist who found Mew discovered that it was really similar to Ditto when it comes to their DNA, and used the little blob to obtain genetic material that could combine with Mew's DNA to create a new, stronger Pokémon.